Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Anderson. I'm board certified in addiction. I have master's in rehabilitation and mental health counseling, PhD, and like I said, also a licensed psychotherapist. I've been doing this for about 22 years in the area of addiction. So we're going to talk about, we're making these videos so that we can cover topics for everybody to have access to. That way people with anxiety, depression, dysfunction, addiction have access to help and support and a lower level of treatment so that everybody can at least get somewhere for assistance. Okay? We're going to cover today stabilization. Stabilization in the context of when you feel that your life is out of control, you feel that you're slipping into addiction, or if you're slipping into depression or anxiety, or all three. The purpose of, like I said, the video is to help you understand and recognize it, the genesis of it, the epidemiology of it, and then the solution. Okay? Basically, the things that can make us unhappy in life are what we're going to be focusing on. Why is that? Well, because those are the things that cause us stress and anxiety. And when you have an inordinate amount of stress and anxiety in your life, it's not because life is doing something against you, it's because that's life's job, is to present conflict so that you will have to adapt, learn from it, and then evolve and gain what we call coping skills. Once you have enough coping skills and you become proficient at using them, then stress no longer is stress. It's just obstacles to overcome to getting where you want to be in life. And the ultimate goal in life, I would hope for everybody, is peace of mind and happiness. How is that achieved? Well, you got to first start with the beginning. And the beginning is to have stability. You got to have stability in life in order to start to work towards prosperity. Everybody agree with that? Okay, good. The things that can cause us to be unstable and to have patterns of dysfunctional behavior are not being able to cope and deal with stress, like I just said. What are the things, give me the top 5 stressors in life. What do you think they are? We'll just stick with the top 5. Money. They're pretty universal and common. Money, right? Financial issues. What else? Relationships. Now, relationships isn't specific to significant others or love interests. They're family members, friends, acquaintances. I'm going to include work relationships as well as your significant others. Okay? What else?
Health.
Your physical health.
Time.
That's one of the biggest one. Excuse me, sir?
Time.
When you say time, what do you mean?
Wasting time.
Well, no. That's when you say wasting time, you control that. So, what else? You've got financial, we've got health, we've got relationships, death or injury, severe, death or the loss of somebody. Injury would fall under health, but loss, so grieving and loss of significant others, especially death of someone close, a spouse. Any other ones? I'm going to throw work, but that's under finance too. Not always, but I'm going to throw work with finance. That way we can kind of streamline it. So those 4 or 5 basic stressors are the things that most people have to cope and deal with in life. Okay. The problem, like I said, aren't those things. It's when you are unable to cope and deal with those things. That's when problems start to occur. Let me ask you this. We talked about coping skills. Where do you learn coping skills from? Do you get an email at a certain age, or somebody send you a handbook in the mail?
Your parents.
Okay, so primarily coping skills are learned. And they're learned primarily in childhood. Now, can you learn coping skills outside of childhood? Of course. I'm saying primarily. Your primary skills for learning how to deal with life are learned in the first probably 12 years of life. But really, you're kind of wired in by age 5 in terms of basic coping mechanisms and in physiology. So we're going to focus on that. Who are your main influences, or what are the main influences in life in the first 5 years of life? Your parents. Who else, or what else? Peers, family, intermediate family, teachers, and also environment. Environment's very important. You know, where you live, or what, poverty, affluence, those types of things, okay? So all of those play a part. What about genetics? Does genetics play a part? A small influential part is played by genetics, but I wouldn't call it significant enough, because mostly you learn stuff, and mostly that's the influence, is the things that you acquire by learning, okay? But there is some physiological influence through genetics, okay? But it's mostly genetic predisposition, so we won't worry so much about that for right now. All right, give me an example of poor coping skill, what it will lead to. Not having good coping skills, not having good or having had adequate parenting or consistent parenting, or coming from a broken home, or coming from abuse or overindulgence, being spoiled as a child. What are the consequences of this? Are there any?
Yes. Jail.
Well, jail, obviously. The one of the biggest statistical factors in terms of dysfunction in a person is coming from a broken or single family home. You have 3 times the likelihood that you will end up dropping out of school, being incarcerated, turning to drugs and alcohol, having depression, anxiety, those types of things. Cognitive delays, developmental delays, et cetera, et cetera. So statistically, that's a bad way to start with a single family home, or an inconsistent or abuse and that kind of stuff. So what are the consequences besides jail?
Entitled.
Well, what does that lead to?
Just not obeying.
I know, but what is that? It all comes down to this, guys. I'm going to summarize it. We'll make it real easy, okay? Jail, all that other stuff. I'm sure there's 100 different manifestations, but let's narrow it down. 2 things happen when you don't have adequate developmental milestones met in childhood, in the first 5 years of life. These milestones are, well, attention, a sense of belonging, safety, and security, which means discipline, structure, and routine. And love is a combination of those 3 things consistently involved. Basically, anxiety and depression is the seed, anxiety is the seed of which all dysfunction stems. Think about that for just a second, okay? From poor relationships or codependence, drug addiction, sexual perversion, aberrance, those types of things, all stem, believe it or not, from one seed. And when you don't have your needs met adequately, and you get too much of or not enough of, or abusive, what happens is that seed turns, the seed is anxiety. So if a child doesn't have the consistency of a stable environment, they become anxious. And that energy is internalized, and then that child starts to have this internalized energy turns into hyperactivity, inattentiveness, fidgety type behavior, aggression, frustration. It creates, anybody know the name of that, by the way? Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, ADD. That's not necessarily, I wouldn't call it it's not a genetic disease. It's not. I know Parents love it when they say it is, because then that takes them off the hook for not being adequate or consistent parents. But that's simply not the case. It's a learned behavior. It's almost primarily learned. Could there be some physiology to it? Of course. But inconsequential in terms of influence. It's mostly learned. If I grow up in an environment that is unstable, inconsistent, chaotic, of course I'm going to be hyperactive. Of course I'm not going to have or do well with structure and routine. And when you live with that stress and anxiety and all that extra energy, which is anxiety, it's going to be very difficult to focus and to pay attention and to be able to sit still in structured, routine environments with any consistency. Think about an adult who's well adjusted. If I put enough stress on that person and then send them off to work that day, are they going to be able to focus and pay attention at work? Okay, does that mean they have ADHD? Or are they under a great deal of duress that has no resolve? So for children, being under that duress of the chaotic and inconsistent environment over time, could that cause chemical imbalances in the brain of that developing child? Of course. So there is some physiology to it. Of course there is. Okay? The problem with that is medication isn't a fix. Not even by a long shot. In fact, it ends up causing more problems than good. Essentially, Ritalin is cocaine, and Adderall, later on in adolescence and young adulthood, is methamphetamine. Almost identical. There's some molecular changes that they've modified with the reuptake and long-term distribution in the body, but it's basically those two substances. Because of those, hypervigilance is one of the symptoms of that. That's why they use it. It gives the illusion that you can pay attention and that you're focusing and that you're absorbing in the information. But the efficacy of those drugs, because they're not medications, is that they do far more damage than good, and they don't actually, there's no efficacy in learning better or retaining more information or being more successful at school. There's just no efficacy to that. So that's a lie. Pharmaceutical companies are lying to you because they want to make billions of dollars. They don't care about the consequences of a developing brain of a child taking cocaine and methamphetamine and then having addiction and suffering the rest of their life as a result of it. So, that being said, how do we deal with anxiety? Well, in childhood, we internalize it. It turns and manifests itself into inattentiveness, like I said, hyperactivity, aggression, and you act it out quite regularly. Temper tantrums, etc., etc. In adulthood, anxiety and depression are the manifestation of unresolved issues or inconsistencies of developmental delays and developmental delays. Okay, everybody understand that? So how do we stabilize? That's the question. Most adults, and statistically it's overwhelming, especially in the last 3 years. The vast majority, probably 80 to 90% of people are going to go through some form of clinical anxiety and or depression, meaning it's persistent for more than 6 months, even if it's garden variety or the generalized anxiety and or depression. Okay, and it's debilitating. It's debilitating because it affects activities of daily living. It affects your functioning, your capacity for relationships, and prosperity. Everybody agrees with that? Okay, good. There's a couple different types of anxiety. There's the mild anxiety. Okay, and I'm going to give you the fix to that right away. So we're not going to prolong this. I'm going to get right into it. Garden variety or mild anxiety is where you feel anxious, worried, kind of overwhelmed at times, kind of withdrawing from responsibility, procrastinating is what you call that. Maybe blood pressure, high blood pressure, maybe you find yourself using alcohol or marijuana or other drugs to kind of, calm down a little bit. but it's not debilitating where you're not having panic attacks, you're not having night terrors, you're not having bouts of time where you're agoraphobia, where you're just not willing to go outside or engage. You're still active and you're relatively functioning, but it's uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable. Does that make sense? Okay. How do you stabilize that? Because it hasn't made significant changes in the chemistry in your brain, so you can behaviorally change it pretty easily. So let's focus on that. The second type of anxiety is more of the clinical anxiety, where you start to have chemical imbalances, and that's a different discussion. Okay, when you start to have chemical imbalances, you're going to have panic attacks, fear. Your fight or flight response is going to be stuck on, and no matter what amount of other things that you do is going to help to change it. You have to do physiological things and chemical changes in order to get stable, in order to do these things that will help the rest. Okay, does that make sense? One is stop for a second and kind of take inventory. Okay, when I say self-inventory, what am I really wanting you to do? If I say, hey, you come to me and you're saying, listen, I feel overwhelmed sometimes. I'm having difficulty sleeping. I'm sleeping, but I'm having trouble sleeping. I sometimes avoid responsibility. I procrastinate a lot. I'm feeling kind of fear all the time. I have a diminished capacity for the pleasurable things that I used to do. I'm not as prosperous as I was. I'm having, trouble completing things and doing stuff. I find myself maybe sleeping less or more. Sleep in my patterns of eating have been affected, where you're not eating as much or you're eating more. My suggestion would be, well, let's take a look and see what's happening. The first thing you could do, which is pretty easy, is take a piece of paper and a pen and write down what are your major stressors. Because when we try to jumble all that stuff in your mind, it's very difficult to keep track of it. Okay? And it turns into other things, and it gets exaggerated. So write down and list what are the major things currently, today, that you're stressed about. Well, I'm having trouble at work, or my finances are really low because of inflation, and my physical health right now, I've been sick, and I'm going through this, or my relationship. So start looking at the areas of your life where you feel that things are getting a little bit out of control, and write them down. Literally list them. Once you have, and don't list every single one, like, well, I didn't get my parking spot today, or my bologna sandwich didn't have enough mayo on it. Come on, be realistic and really get the main sources of the anxiety that you feel and discomfort, and then write those out and list only about 5 to 10. Just take your top 5, really. If you got more, list them, but top 5 should be plenty. And then put them in and prioritize them, just from 1 to 5. What's the worst one down to 5, okay? How long should this take? Well, if you're dealing with anxiety, you know what that stuff is. It's pretty readily apparent and self-evident. So just write it down. Shouldn't take but maybe 15, 20 minutes, okay? Once you have it down and it's prioritized, the next thing that you have to take inventory of, and you don't need to write it down. Sometimes it's helpful to write down how much, but what are you ingesting? What are you eating? What are you drinking? Okay, here's why I say this. You have to be aware of fast foods and processed foods. Are they good or bad for you? They're horrible for you. Can they exacerbate anxiety and or depression? Absolutely, without question. So we want to make sure that we don't have an overindulgence of fast foods, processed foods, or eating out. Yes, restaurants aren't good either. Sugars, fats, and salts are prevalent in all of those things. They all have in common. All right? Is it good to drink 4 Red Bulls a day and or a couple Mountain Dews and stuff, and then you wonder why you can't sleep at night? And then you say, well, I have to smoke weed because I can't sleep. Could it be the 18 cigarettes you're smoking a day, the 4 Mountain Dews, the 2 Red Bulls, and a cup of coffee in the morning? I wonder if that has anything to do with it. So you have to take account of the stimulants that you're ingesting, especially if your consequences are sleep problems, focus, paying attention, having overwhelming fear or procrastination, feeling jittery, high blood pressure, heart palpitations. I mean, those are the symptoms. Now, can all of those be caused by stimulants? Of course they can. Does stimulants exacerbate anxiety? Of course it does. We already said that. So, write that stuff down. Step 3, stop doing what's making the problem worse. Stop it. If you're drinking 4 Mountain Dews a day, cut it down to 2. If you're eating fast food 4 times a week, cut it down to 2. I call it the half rule. Just to start, just cut it in half. Because your body will make a marked recovery, and it won't go into full-blown withdrawal mentally for not having the things that you've habituated yourself to. Does that make sense? So just the half rule. Just cut it in half, okay? 10 cigarettes, cut it down to 5. That way your body isn't going into withdrawal, you're not out too much, and you'll notice a significant change, okay? Once you cut that out, the third thing, most people that have anxiety are chaotic. What do I mean by chaotic?
Not organized.
Not organized. That's it. It's very simple. They're just simply not organized. Their intention is good, right? And they try to remember all the stuff and so on. What's the number one cause of anxiety besides stimulants? Well, thinking about things that you have to do, obligations, whether it be work, relationships, or so on, and trying to jumble all that in your head. And your brain is terrified that it's going to forget some things and you're going to have consequences as a result. So, in order to organize that and to put things down so that your brain can relax through it, a simple planner, a daily planner, from 7 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night, 7 days a week, months in between. That way you can simply write down obligations, important paperwork, codes. Another thing that's super huge, again, we said is finances. Okay? Oftentimes people try to jumble, and this is all the planner part. So 4 is stop taking the stimulants is number 3. Number 4 is get a planner and organize. Or write lists if you don't want to spend the $10, $15 on a planner to help your life better. So write out a list or a planner. And basically what you're going to put in the planner is what your obligations are for the day. You're going to write down important information and or dates. And the other thing that I want you to put down, which is really important, is your finances. I literally want you to have all your bills listed, from mortgage and payments, this, that, and so on and so forth. Because I'm telling you, most people's stress is finance related, and I can't pay my bills, and this is, and I don't know where all my money's going, and this and that. When you organize your finances by simply writing them down, it's going to help you to understand how much you need to make every week, where you can get ahead, where you need to cut back on. If 40% of your bills is Amazon and you're buying silly shit every week, you can stop that. You can say, listen, I don't need to eat out 7 days this week because that cost me $1,000, when I can cook my meals and save $900. Do you see what I'm saying? That way you know. There's times when you can go out. There's times when you can go to buy on Amazon. But for the most part, you have to keep into this consistency. Does that make sense? So write out all the bills and write out your income. Side hustles, so on. Sometimes you may have to hustle a little bit here and there, sell some things or whatever, but you'll know in advance. Does that make sense? That will take a great deal of stress out. Plus, the mind doesn't like to juggle things. Its capacity for memory is about 7 things. You've got 25, 30 things juggling around in there. What's going to happen? You're going to start to forget. Does that cause, if you miss appointments, is that going to cause you problems? Yeah, because then you got to start paying extra, and then you're going to miss a bill, and then you got to pay the fine for the bill or the fees involved. It's a nightmare. Organization for work, to know what days, what times, what shifts you're taking, or for school, and to write all that stuff down will allow your body and your brain to unwind, to decompress. Does that make sense? Because you know where it is. All your important dates, your passwords, and all that other stuff is at the ready. Instead of searching in the computer, anybody have that? Where's my password? And you're on the phone with somebody, you need your password, you can't do it, and then you were on hold for 2 hours, and you got to redo the whole thing. Is that stressful? It's incredibly. But if you have it at the ready, where you can say, hold on, boom, here it is. Here's my VIN number. Here's my code for this. Here's my access to this. Then you can resolve issues really easy, just with a little organization, okay? There's more to it, but those are the 3 basics, okay? Everybody got that? All right. Number 5. What is the best way to relieve excess energy and to reset the chemistry in the brain and the body? Exercise. Hands down, bar none, better than any kind of medication you could possibly ever take, is physical exertion of the body. Now, when I say physical exertion, there's a difference between fatigue and exercise. Fatigue is if you're working 18 hours in construction or you did hard labor all day and so on and so forth. Is that considered exercise? No, because it's not beneficial. It's actually detrimental and will cause more stress and anxiety. So exercise is a controlled amount of exertion so that you have regulated blood flow to heal and replenish the muscles and tendons and physical chemistry in the body in order for you to recover and grow and be strong. Does that make sense? Okay.
What about taking trips?
What's that?
What about vacations and taking
Okay,
trips?
well, no, hold on. That's not in our top 5, but we're getting there. It's in the top 10. Absolutely. And we're going to get to the escapisms here in just a little bit. But right now, we want physical stabilization. So we want to cut out the chemicals that are exacerbating our anxiety. We want to physically exert chemicals so that we have normal levels. And then we want to take inventory of the stressors which are causing the chemical imbalances. Once we do the physiology of it, then we can get into the next ones, which is yours is going to be included in this. One of the things, besides the organization, in order to counter this after physical exertion, well, first of all, let's clarify. When I say physical exertion, how many times you got to exercise? You have to go 7 days a week, 4 hours a day? No, of course not. A minimum of 3 times, ideally we'd be 4 to 5, for 45 minutes. 10-minute warm up, 20 minutes of vigorous exercise, another 10-minute warm down. 45 minutes to an hour, because you can have your vigorous exercise go more. You want to get your heart rate over 130 for at least 10 to 15 minutes. That's enough to reset your chemistry. That's enough to give you kind of an anaerobic workout so that you can have the physiological changes that are beneficial. Okay? Everybody got that? So 3 times a week minimally for 30 to 45 minutes of strenuous exercise with a little warm up in between and after. Okay? All right. Now, after we got the physical parts pretty stable, now what can we do psychologically that would help out? He said vacation. Well, it'd be great if we could all just take a vacation to the Bahamas and so on and just take off of work. But can we still take a vacation, but more of a mini or stay-at-home vacation? Absolutely. A visit to the pool, to a lake, to the ocean, which is only 20 minutes away, thankfully, in Florida, in any direction. So, yeah, you can find a little escape of peace and so on. Should you bring your phone and your work with you and your laptop? Absolutely not. That's the stressful stuff. This is to decompress. This is to unwind. This is to relax. So you have to go into it with that mindset. Okay, I'm going to go sit by the lake or go fishing for a little bit. Or I'm going to go relax by the pool. Or I'm going to go to the mall and just sit around and people watch. That's a fun thing to do for some people. So there's lots of things that you can do. Find something that you're interested to do. Some people just like to walk around in nature. But get outdoors. Get outside. Get detached from technology. Okay? That's really important. What else?
That's what I like to do, walk. I take walks.
Yeah,
Early in
and
the
that's not
morning.
only physical, but it's
Yeah.
also
Mind.
kind of like a spiritual thing.
Yeah.
But what else do we need? Well, here's one that people overlook. Talking. Man, I'll tell you, there isn't much better than being able to express and vent and talk and get feedback and to be consoled and to be given advice and to normalize the things you're going through is unbelievably healing. When people have anxiety or stress or depression and they talk about it, it significantly lessens it. Significantly. Far better than any kind of medication or drug. So, talking about it. Now, should you just go walk around, talk to strangers about it? No, of course not. Not that it would hurt so much, but you don't want to, put out your personal information to just random strangers. But certainly, people in a setting that you are aware of or acquaintances, you can absolutely talk about that stuff. And because who can't relate to stress and anxiety? There isn't a human being alive. If I say, yeah, I've been really stressed out and I'm kind of hurting right now and so on, I guarantee you what's going to come out of their mouth. Me too. I went through that last week. You know what? Hang in there. This is what I feel the same, and so on and so forth. And how do you feel when you have support and normalization and reassurance? It feels wonderful. It feels really good. Okay? Now, it would be even better if you had close friends that you could talk to. Okay? Now, speaking of close friends, it's important to have that support. So, I'm assuming most people have some friends. The other thing that you can do that's going to help out quite a bit is laugh and cry. I know that seems odd. You're like, well, why would you? Laughing and crying resets the chemistry in the brain. People actually funded research for this too, studying tears and so on and so forth. I'm not going to get into the story, but I used to find it quite funny that they funded $1 million to study tears in people, and that there's different types of tears based upon the emotional output of the person's pain, emotion, and hurt, physical pain. I'm sorry, physical pain, emotional, right, and irritants were the three different types of tears. And in those tears had different chemicals. So the release of chemicals by laughing, crying, is really important. I mean, what do you think the natural reaction to pain and suffering is? Well, no, it's crying. Anger is first, and then frustration, and then withdrawal, and then crying. But crying is the outward. Why? Because it's the way your brain gets rid of stuff and then resets the chemistry.
They say it cleanses the soul.
It does cleanse the soul. Laughing is the best medicine. Did you ever hear that? It really, why? Because there's a chemical reaction, an extreme chemical. A good belly laugh can reset the chemistry in the brain. That could last 4 to 5 hours. That's way better than taking a drug.
Yeah, there have been times where I was like upset or pissed off and I see something funny.
And just belly laugh to the point where you're like, I can't do anything but laugh. Sometimes people's reaction to real overstress is what? To just bust out laughing. Because that's the body's brain is like, it's almost comical. Did you ever have such a bad day you just start laughing about it? And then you cry? Well, that's because the brain is telling you we got to reset the chemistry here. Okay, so go with that. Now, is it more likely that men would cry and seek out talking to people? Probably not. Why not? Because stereotypically they're taught to bury things and bottle things and so on. So I'm going to tell you right off the bat, that's idiotic and stupid.
Their pride.
Yeah, that's idiotic and stupid. That's a good way to get yourself into the mental institution. Bottle things up and don't talk and don't express yourself. That's idiotic. So again, that's an old, antiquated stereotype. Don't follow that one unless you want to have severe mental illness. Okay. The next thing is, and again, this is really important, is to live each day with some purposeful task. What do I mean by that? You have to be actively involved in either school or meaningful work or productivity in some way. You have to be productive. That's why I said that planner is threefold, because not only does it take things that helps to organize stuff, but when your brain knows what it's supposed to be doing and how to do it, that organization is structure and routine, and the brain loves that. So putting something on the paper for the week tells the brain to look forward to something. Okay? So I found this, and this is I've studied the last 10 years anxiety, and this is generalized anxiety only, not with panic attacks, and it's not significant, but it's generalized anxiety. I found that most of the clients that come in for treatment of substance abuse have anxiety, and people with anxiety have substance abuse. Okay? Let me ask you this question. Can you have anxiety without substance abuse? Yes, you can have anxiety without substance abuse. Let me ask you this question. Can you have substance abuse without anxiety? No, absolutely not. By virtue of abusing substances, what happens to your chemistry? In particular, dopamine, serotonin, GABA, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. Those are the stabilization chemicals. Oxytocin, there's a couple other ones. But these are the ones that help to stabilize. There's going to be deficits or surpluses depending on what type of drug you're taking. So if I'm taking stimulants, what are the chances of me having anxiety? 100%. You don't have a choice in the matter because of the chemical imbalances, literally, that the chemical induces. Same with the central nervous system depressant like alcohol, weed, drugs, those types of things. Benzos, opiates, opioids. Are you going to have low-grade depression? Absolutely, because that's the physiological byproduct. So you can't have substance abuse without chemical imbalances, which lead to those things. Okay, does that make sense? So when I told you to take a look and see what you were doing, if you drink copious amounts of alcohol and you're suffering from depression, what do you suppose is a big determinant? The abuse of the alcohol. Cut it out. Stop it. If you're doing cocaine and amphetamines and drugs of that nature, stimulants, and you have high anxiety and you can't sleep, stop it. You'll find that that usually remedies the problem. Not the underlying cause, but the problem, so that you can deal with it. Does that make sense? If you implement these things, proper nutrition, when I say proper, just not overindulging fast food or eating out and not taking stimulants, okay? And you exercise 3 times a week vigorously for 45 minutes. And you get a planner and you just organize your week and you write important things down and you get your finances in vision so you can see them and organize them and plan for them. What are the chances that your anxiety, which was garden variety, would dissipate and go away? It would absolutely go away. It would absolutely go away. By just those basic 3 things. I'm not even talking about, like I said, meditation or getting, out and talking to people, social context and with friends and acquaintances, etc. If you did all of those things in physical, emotional, cognitive, spiritual, and social, if you shored up all those areas, you wouldn't even know what anxiety was or depression was. So, again, most people, and people hate to hear this, but I'll be straightforward with you. Most anxiety and depression, like I said, the mild or garden variety kind, generalized, is self-induced, literally caused by that person and exacerbated by the things they're doing. And when they seek to control that behaviorally, it dissipates to the point of being non-consequential, or it dissipates completely, becomes asymptomatic. That's just the fact. Does anybody not believe that? Okay. So that's the stabilization process. Stop doing what's causing the problem, meaning the things that you're eating, stimulants, the drugs that you're taking, etc., and stop. The second thing is organization with a planner and to write down lists so that you have things so that your brain can relax. And then the other thing is physical or vigorous exercise. Absolutely important. And then social supports, a place where you can unwind and relax, to detach from technology and to be able to laugh and to cry and to get support from acquaintances, friends, and significant others. Here's the fifth one, and this is something that I've been researching for the last couple months, and I'm writing some literature on it right now that I'll be turning into a lecture here pretty soon. Social media can absolutely, without question, even without all other things aforementioned, like stimulants and drugs and disorganization, just by and of that self, social media can overstimulate the brain and cause depression and anxiety. Especially, but not limited to, but especially TikTok. Sorry, TikTok. Sorry, Chinese government. So TikTok and Instagram and Snapchat in particular, TikTok, Snapchat, and Instagram in that order. Facebook, and YouTube, but for the most part, those types of social media where there's quick action, where you're scrolling and you're seeing an inordinate amount of overstimulation of all kinds of things that are unrealistic expectations about life. Millionaires, Ferraris and Lamborghinis and Bugattis and beautiful everybody, and mansions and trips around the world to these exotic places that really only 1 to 2% of the population ever see or do. And you're watching it 24/7 for hours at a time. The average person spends 2.5 hours. That's the average person. There's 30% of people that spend, or 40% of people that spend 6 to 8 hours a day on that. And what happens is they have overexposure to bullying or being bullied. They have overexposure to horrible, horrific things that they could never see or would never see in real life. Murder, death, war, politics, propaganda. There's nothing you can't see on the internet. Pornography and unrealistic and these fake avatar like cartoon characters of beautiful women and men and so on, and physical perfection. All of that's a lie and it's all fake, and you're seeing that and you hold yourself to those standards and you start to have that envy, or you start to have that depression as a result of not competing with or keeping up with the Joneses. And then the overstimulation, just the chemical overstimulation of seeing all of those things over and over, all that negativity of war and death and impending doom, and the world is going to end, and politics and corruption and police brutality and all that stuff over and over and over and over again. You think that the brain doesn't respond in kind with dopamine and serotonin over and over and over again? It comes to the point where you oversensitize your brain to the point where it can't produce that chemistry anymore, and it becomes deficit, which causes chemical imbalances in the brain and then exacerbates anxiety and depression in the person. And it manifests itself, especially with sleep disturbances first, and then anxiety. Your cortisol response, your fight or flight response from the amygdala, is nonstop because you're watching all these stimulation on this internet with all these horrible things and pleasurable things back and forth, and your brain just can't comprehend that. Does that make sense? So you're overstimulating to the point of chemical imbalance. And that's a dangerous road you're going on. Okay? So if that be the case, unplug, unwind. Can the brain come back from that? Absolutely. Absolutely it can. It takes about 10 to 14 days for the brain to reattach itself to life. Life, believe it or not, folks, is slow. And it doesn't afford you too much stimulus or not enough stimulus, kind of in the middle. Okay? But if you're watching tropical paradises and beautiful this and pornography and death and destruction and so on every day for 7 hours, and then you go back to your life, you're going to be bored to death within minutes. It literally, watch the internet in particular, these apps and stuff have lowered our attention span less than a goldfish from, I believe it was 16 seconds or 18 seconds down to 12. That's significant. The average attention span was about 18, 20 seconds, and now it's about 12, which is less than a goldfish. Maybe 8 to 10, I think, and the goldfish's is 12. But regardless, what I'm saying is when you overstimulate, and then you go back to real life, reality, none of that's there. You don't have a Bugatti. You don't have a mansion. You don't have 15 beautiful women at your house playing techno music and popping champagne. You don't have millions of dollars to spare. Well, maybe you do. If you do, invite me over. If not, you're going to be very bored and disappointed with your life. Does that make sense? And you're going to be constantly looking to fill it with stuff. And then you're going to feel like you're missing out on something or that you're not doing what you're supposed to. And that's going to cause you anxiety and stress and depression. Everybody understand that? Okay. Has anybody experienced this phenomenon?
Police brutality, yeah.
Well, yeah. But I mean, like overexposure, 24/7.
Christmases aren't the same.
What's that?
Christmases aren't the same.
Yeah.
Presents aren't big enough.
Yeah, everything is inadequate. Everything's inadequate. And that's the problem. When you overstimulate, then regular life just doesn't seem appealing anymore. And that's not realistic. Okay? So, that's what I wanted to cover with regards to stability. So if you stop those things, the chances of recovery. Now, how long does it take for the brain to kind of regroup itself when it's been chemically imbalanced from drugs, alcohol, and prolonged exposure to stress and anxiety?
21 days.
Approximately 30 days to 90 days. Now, the 90 days is more when there was a chemical imbalance, not a situational or acute chemical imbalance. I'm talking about significant, where there's panic attacks, fear, significant, and that would be more clinical diagnostics. But for the generalized anxiety and depression, like we talked about, it would take about 21 days. You'll notice a significant improvement with the physical exercise, diet change, etc. within days. Literally within days, it'll go from a 9 down to about a 5. And then after that, it'll dwindle down to where it needs to be, 2. Does anybody live without stress? No, it's unrealistic. We need a certain amount of stress in order for us to adapt and to continue to evolve in coping and learning. So, little bit of coping. Remember, people pay good money for the right kind of stress, right? I pay what, $89 for a damn fun pass at Busch Gardens so I can get on a roller coaster and jump off of shit and get splashed by stuff. So that kind of stress is good stress because it's with the mental context. Does that make sense? So when you get really good at coping and dealing with life because you're organized, because you exercise, because you problem solve, then that bad stress is going to turn into good stress. Does that make sense? And it won't be consequential to you anymore. That's the only difference between good stress and bad stress is how good you are at solving it. Does that make sense? So keep that in mind. All right, outstanding. Does anybody have any questions? No? Okay, good. Outstanding. Good.